Hello, everybody, and welcome back as we make our way through the book of Revelation. Today we are reading Revelation chapter 12, and we will be discussing it. Revelation chapter 12 in the NIV says, "A great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven. An enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads. His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that he might devour her child the moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the desert to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, 'Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ. For the accuser of our brothers, who accuses them before God day and night, has been hurled down. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and to the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short.' When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given the 2 wings of a giant eagle, or of a great eagle, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the desert, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. Then, from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman, and to sweep her away with a torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river and the dragon, and spewed out of its mouth. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and who hold to the testimony of Jesus. And the dragon stood on the shore of the sea." All right, so what we have going on here at the very beginning is that John says he saw a great and wondrous sign. A sign. This is a symbol. What he's telling you, the story, something he saw, it was like a vision. It is a sign that represents a deeper spiritual truth. So it's not a literal woman or a literal dragon. Rather, it is a sign. So we need to understand that. And each of the elements has a meaning. And we can interpret some of the meaning from the section where the voice in heaven talks. And before we get to what these parts mean, though, it seems like this chapter is kind of divided into 3 sections. So the first section is what happens with the woman and the dragon fights against Michael and loses, and a third of the stars fall down to the earth, and the serpent is hurled to the earth, right? So that's the first scene. Then the second scene is the voice in heaven, which speaks. And then after the voice in heaven speaks, we get a third scene where the dragon saw that he'd been hurled down to the earth, and he pursues the woman who gave birth, and he keeps fighting her, but God protects her again by giving her these wings where she flies off to the wilderness, and she's there for a time, time and half a time. The devil spews water at her. She's protected again, and then the devil is enraged, the dragon is enraged against the rest of her offspring, who are those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So we have three different scenes in this drama, with the middle one starting with, now have come the salvation and the power of the kingdom and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ. So we have before his kingdom has been established, and then it's established, and then after the kingdom has been established. Now, how does the timeline of this work? Well, we don't have an exact, thing here, but we understand that Jesus was the Messiah who came. And so likely what we're talking about here is before the coming of Jesus, what was happening, then the coming of Jesus and his work of atonement on the cross and his resurrection, and then the reality that comes for those after the Messiah has taken authority. And you say, well, has the Messiah taken authority? Well, yes, he has. Matthew 28. Jesus said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So Christ has taken all authority, and so then we have a scene that's happening afterwards. So before Christ, the victory of Christ, after Christ, are kind of three scenes in this sign that John sees. All right, so what are some of these things that we see? Some of these signs. Well, first we see a woman. Now, this woman is not referring to the Virgin Mary because she doesn't really fit the context. Rather, the woman probably represents Israel, the Messianic community, God's chosen people, out of whom God was supposed to bring his Messiah. And we saw that the devil was already against Israel, was already working against them before the Messiah came. And that's the child. So the dragon represents Satan. We get this clearly because it says, the great dragon, in verse 9, was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. So we see right away, the woman represents the Messianic community out of whom God brings his Messiah. We have the dragon, who is the devil. And it's interesting here because the devil is portrayed as an actual character. And they tell us here, John tells us that he is the ancient serpent. So he's taking us back to the Garden of Eden. And he's making us think of the Garden of Eden. And in fact, we should be thinking also of the garden, because when they were cast out of the garden, God made a prophecy that there would be a constant enmity between the offspring of the woman and the serpent. And that the serpent would bite his heel, but her descendant would crush his head. So he's taking us back to Genesis chapter 3 in Eden, and he's reminding us, he says, this devil, this dragon, is that same serpent. And he is also the devil, which is like an adversary, and he's also the Satan, or the accuser. So also know that Satan is not a name. Satan is an identification. It's a title. We don't actually know Satan's name. The Bible doesn't say it. Now, some people say the word Lucifer, but the Bible, as far as I remember, does not actually call the devil by a specific name. Rather, gives more of like titles such as the Satan, which means the accuser, and that's what he does. We see that in the chapter that he accuses the people. And so, okay, the woman, Messianic community, the dragon is Satan. Then she has a male child who will rule with an iron scepter. That is a picture of Christ, right? And then we have the wilderness. Let's think about the wilderness. Think back to the Exodus. Where did the people go? They went to the wilderness. And in the wilderness, God protected his people from Pharaoh. God built his people as they went through the desert in Sinai. So God's people were in the desert, and they were formed in the desert. They were formed in the wilderness. But while they were there, they were under God's care. And that's where the woman flees after the birth of her child who is protected. And so the wilderness or the desert represents a sort of spiritual refuge. But it's not a Garden of Eden. It's not a paradise. But it is a spiritual refuge where God cares for and raises up and brings out his people. So God cares for her in the wilderness or in the desert for 1,260 days. You remember that from the last chapter. That is 40 months. It is also 3.5 years. And it represents a limited time. And then after this, it says that there's this war in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. So the great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. So this is the first scene. The first scene is God had a messianic community. He protected the messianic community. The enemy, the Satan, the devil, wanted to destroy the Messiah, but God protected his Messiah, and God protected his true Israel, his messianic community. And though the devil went to war, he was defeated. He was overpowered. And you notice that God doesn't actually fight him. God sends the angel Michael, and Michael overpowers him. God doesn't stoop down. God and the devil are not some kind of equal powers. The devil is not anywhere near and equal to God. So God doesn't even have to fight him. He just sends Michael, who, by the way, in the Old Testament is portrayed as a warrior angel who defends God's people. So the angel Michael and his army of angels, they fight the dragon. They cast him down to the earth. And now we have the second scene, which is the victory, because it says, now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God. Why? Because the Messiah has come. The Messiah has been born. The Messiah now has the rule. It says, and the authority of his Christ. So before the Messiah, the world was under God's care, but was still awaiting the authority of God's Christ. Now God's Christ has come. And what happens? Or what happened? The accuser of our brothers who accused them before our God day and night has been hurled down. The devil has been defeated. Christ has power. Christ has control. And who else overcomes the devil? The Messianic people. Because it says, they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. So, not just did the devil lose to the angels, the devil loses to God's people too. And what is our weapon? Our weapon is the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. Again, we see this idea of word. We have to declare God's truth. It's obviously important that we practice what we preach and we live out a Christian life. But we must also be people who share the word of our testimony. And it says they did this at the cost of their lives because they did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. And then, but woe to you, earth and sea, because the devil has gone down to you. So where's the devil? The devil's on the earth. And he's filled with fury. He's anger. So now we had the victory of Christ. The devil's been thrown down. Christ has authority. Now what's the reality? It says, when the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. So here he is. He's like, you know what? I still hate God's people. I'm still after God's people. I'm going after them. But the woman was given the wings so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the desert, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time. What does that mean? Well, it means 3.5 years. A time is 1 year, times is 2 years, and half a time is half a year. And so again, you have that same figure, 3.5 years, 1,260 days, 40 months. We get this a time, and half a time that she is in the desert. But here's what's interesting. To use the phrasing a time, and half a time, John is calling people back to the book of Daniel. And in the book of Daniel, Daniel describes the time of the tribulation as a time, times, and half a time. So it's like he's saying here, John is saying here, that the reality of the church after the victory of Christ is a church in tribulation. Now, I know we've always heard about a great tribulation at the end of days, right? And we always worry, what's it going to be like in the great tribulation? But if you were in John's day and you were living in a church that was being persecuted, where Christians are being killed, where they're being dragged out of their homes and executed, you might think, the tribulation seems to be happening all around us. This sure seems like a tribulation. And the truth is that the majority of Christians today live in situations of persecution. And so I think what we have this message here saying is that God's people understand that He has all authority, that Christ is in charge, but we are still in the tribulation. And the devil hates us. The devil hates God's people and wants to destroy us. And so, what does he do? He spews water like a river, right? Out of his mouth. What is this? What's spewing out of the devil's mouth? Lies, deceit, false teaching, accusations, all types of things, trying to distract from the true testimony, to take away from the true testimony of Christ. But God protects His people even from that. And it says, the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring. Those are the rest of the people who have come to Christ all around the world. Who are her offspring? Those who obey God's commandments and who hold to the testimony of Jesus. So here we have it again. How did they overcome? By the blood and by the word of their testimony. Who are the true children? Those who obey God's commandments and who hold to the testimony of Jesus. Those who hold to what is true. So if I were in one of these churches and I was hearing this, I think the message that you would be hearing, or I would be hearing, is that God's people have always had an adversary. This adversary has been out to destroy since the very beginning. But this adversary has been defeated. Oh yeah, he's still furious, but he's already lost. He's still making war, but he's already lost. And he was overcome by the Messiah. Michael and the angels defeated him. And we also have victory over him by the power of the blood of the Lamb and by the word of our testimony that is held even unto death. So we actually overpower and destroy the devil by standing firm in the testimony of who Jesus is and what we believe, even to the point of death. And that might not be something that you have to face, but it might be. But we have victory if we hold firm to the testimony of Jesus. And here's the other reality. God's church is a church that has been called to endure tribulation, recognizing that even as things are difficult, God's hand is upon us and our enemy has been defeated. And that's good news. So I think as as we're looking at this is a good place to end, recognizing our enemy has been defeated. We have power over him by the blood of the Lamb. God is watching out for us. So let's continue to be faithful, because the reality of the church is we are a church that faces tribulation. So let's face it faithfully. God bless you.